right. So, bulk of your career, you have spent working primarily in consumer advertising-based businesses. You were at Fatherly. You launched Fatherly. You were at Thrillist, right? So you spent a lot of time there, and then you decide to jump over into not only into politics, but a subscription-based business. Talk a little bit about that transition and why the shift from really consumer advertising more towards subscription-based business.
Well, first, the relationship with the Dispatch started in 2019 before Jonah and Steve had actually launched the company. They were looking for some advice on everything from business model, tech stack. I met them through a mutual friend. My initial advice to them was to focus more on a direct relationship with the customer as opposed to an open web-based model. Uh, and that's really how the relationship developed. I'd like to say that I had a grand thesis of, hey, I want to focus on news, I want to focus on subscription. Ultimately, as someone who's a close reader of a media operator, kind of knew where the winds were going. After the experience working in consumer lifestyle, and realized if I was going to stay in media, I really wanted to focus on subscription, a more creator-led or public intellectual-led business, one that was appropriately capitalized for the ambitions that the company had, and that plus just the consistent relationship with the Dispatch, a deep allegiance to the mission was really what ultimately moved me over.
So we did a dive on you guys probably about a year ago. I was looking when researching this, and at the time, we reported 600,000 free newsletter subscribers, 45,000 paid subs. That was a year ago. What is the state of the audience and the subs business today?
The subs business has grown. We have been focusing a lot on the B2B side of the house, I would say, since I last spoke with you. So that's consumed a lot of bandwidth at it's like a 32-person company at the time. We acquired SCOTUS Blog. That was part of a broader theory that we can go into. I don't know if we actually talked about that in great detail. And so a lot of our focus has been standing up effectively a parallel business. I would say overall revenue from year over year has grown about 50%. And it was really only until Q1 of this year that we started building much more of a deliberate marketing growth engine on the consumer sub side. We have open headcount right now. We're looking for a full-time head of growth marketing. We've been using a series of fractional resources, and we finally have, I think, the right fractional mix in place right now to give us a little bit more runway before finding a full-time growth marketer. But we intend to grow, I'd say, top line revenue another 50% this year.
As you think, so let's assume those numbers are relatively constant, 600,000, 45,000 paid. That's about a 7.5% conversion from free to paid, which is actually a very strong conversion. It's even higher. That's higher than AMOs. You talk to a lot of mass scale consumer businesses, like that's multiple times greater. As you think about that growth for the consumer business, getting to 50,000, 60,000, 70,000 paid subs, do you see it more as a function of improving conversion, or is it purely more on the top line, grow from 600,000 to 1 million to 1.5 million free subs?
It's definitely improving conversion. I think we've recognized that it's a universally, and I would say anecdotally, that we've been giving way too much content away for free. And we even see that our trial to conversion numbers are, upwards of 75%. So really it's a game of, can we get people registered? Can we get people in trial? And once they're in trial, can they hit the paywall as much as possible? We're still figuring out what that window is. It 3 articles in the first month, 5 articles in the first month, but we're much more disciplined now of getting people to hit that paywall within the first 14 days of the trial. So in many ways, I'd say how we're thinking about growth is much more tactical, perhaps less vibes-based than previously. I think previously when ultimately when you have an editorial team that's running the company, it's if we create great content, the subs will come, the conversions will come. That's true to a point, as you've seen. I think you need to get a little bit more technical, specific. Lifecycle means a lot more. So even in our growth marketing description, we're focusing much more on someone who looks who has more life cycle chops, who understands that trial to conversion window.
I think the thing I've noticed with creator businesses is almost a fear of marketing the
Right.
subscription product.
An allergy, if nothing else.
This is the only industry in the world where we're afraid to ask for money.
Right.
I was talking to a creator yesterday, and he was excited. He had just hit 6 figures in subscription revenue. And he's like, I'm struggling to get people to keep, more people to pay. And I asked him the last time he sent a marketing email asking people to pay, he goes, I've never done that. Basically it's entirely content dependent. The way I write a great article, does that drive? As you've continued to kind of lean into that growth, are you finding that there are certain messages to your audience that do get them to convert at a higher rate than others?
Yes. So previously, I would say we relied heavily on mission-based appeals. That works to a point, and that'll convert a certain cohort. But there are others that need different messaging, are more sensitive to price-based messaging at the right moments. I don't think we took much stock in the idea of nurturing, the idea that you really do need to get people to hit a paywall, to sample a variety of content, to realize that, hey, we're not just politics. It's politics, policy, culture, it's economic news, it's legal news. There's a wide berth of topics that, especially in an era when a lot of potential subscribers are perhaps burned out of politics, because it's everything's all politics all the time. Being able to offer an appropriate sample is really helpful, or just focusing the appeal based on the topic area that's of greatest interest to them.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding of the Dispatch's launch was it launched during the first Trump administration, almost as this is a place for conservatives to go who don't agree with Trump. Is that a fair representation?
I'd say that was one of the kind of raison d'etres of the company. These were Steve and Jonah were, I'd say fixtures in the conservative media movement as it was defined, in the kind of 2019 era. They saw that there was this lurching towards greater and greater like sensationalism, less faith in original reporting, fact-based news. And the Dispatch was launched probably more as a corrective to that. And I think there was a sense that there was going to be a post-Trump era after the first Trump administration, requiring a platform for thought and consideration of what comes next for the conservative movement. Here we are, 6 years later. I think we can safely say that there probably will be a post-Trump era after, Trump 2. But that again is just one dimension, I'd say, of what we do now. I'd say we have a faith-based coverage that we're leaning into a lot more. I think what we've realized is that the labels are a bit more challenging because there's like a recent Pew study that suggested that 44% of Americans identify as independent. You have a lot of folks that may have identified as being conservative leaning or even left of center, who no longer align with broader national kind of party politics. And so in many ways, we've adjusted how we talk about the work that we're doing to focus more on the underlying values across each of these topic areas. There's much more of an emphasis on markets, on, as I mentioned, faith, broadly defined, family, broadly defined. And I'd say in aggregate, that reads as a platform that has more of like a center-right orientation, the way that The Atlantic doesn't broadly identify as being left of center, but you'd ask most consumers and they would probably label it as such.
I know we're about, 14, 15 months into Trump 2. Have you noticed an increase in engagement and new subscribers in both free and paid with the increased velocity of news tied to President Trump 2.0?
Yes, in part because I think there's a lot of flooding of the zone of misinformation, disinformation that you're seeing even coming from seemingly credible outlets. And I think one of the other kind of core reasons for being for the Dispatch is that we're deeply credible the work that we do is highly considered. We're not necessarily trying to break every single story, but we are trying to get every single story right. And we also recognize that there is a reasonable amount of news that people should be expected to consume. And so even in like the UX of the site, we're not, emphasizing infinite scroll experiences. But yeah, certainly we see spikes in subscriptions around, chaotic news events when consumers are looking for a sense of truth, a sense of clarity, especially as it pertains to increasingly in the second term foreign policy.
As a right of center publication, do you find that you have folks who are perhaps on the left who are signing up and are in this era of politics being the only culture there really is, subjecting themselves to opinions they might not agree with? Have you done a dive into the audience to see like what percent is a more left-leaning cohort?
I don't think we have the exact numbers handy, but it is a significant percentage the last time we looked at it. It goes back to like how we actually phrased the question. We do know just through the testimonials that we receive, or people are like, the first thing that they say is like, I'm someone who comes from more progressive circles or identifies being left of center, and I come to the Dispatch because I know this is a bastion of truth and fair-minded reporting, and also it gives me an opportunity to channel certain reflexive assumptions that I have about the way of the world. So we do know that that is a significant cohort. We've also recruited contributors that probably identify as being more left of center for that very reason, but also to promote the idea that the Dispatch is more of a platform where constructive discourse can happen.
All right, so when we reported on the Dispatch a year ago, 2024 revenue was $5 million. You had at the time projected that you were going to double revenue year over year, hit 10 million. 50% growth, though, now looking back on 2025, which settles you at, what is it, 7.5 million, I think? Yeah. What happened with the delta? Why not the double in revenue? What do you think occurred there?
Became much more of an investment year. So we set out at the end of 2024 with three key objectives, strategic objectives. The first one was the Dispatch needs to do a better job of differentiating in a more kind of highly competitive news market. When we launched in 2019, we were one of the first media companies on Substack. The denominator of content on Substack has gone to effectively affinity since then. The second was we really wanted to double down in areas of strength. The Dispatch had been growing really through pure organic editorial product market fit. And we wanted to apply a bit more strategy of like, how do we focus our investments in areas of the business that have more velocity than others? And then the third key objective was we want to build much more of a kind of, call it a Marvel Cinematic Universe of characters beyond the key principles of the company. And then within that framing, we saw that SCOTUS Blog likely could be for sale. And so we made a real play for it because we thought that accomplished all three of those strategic objectives. So it was a play of getting into a B2B vertical that would further differentiate us from competition. It would allow us to provide a kind of rigorous, down-the-middle news-focused complement to our Advisory Opinions podcast, which focuses on Supreme Court news. And it also, in Amy Howe, who's the primary author and co-founder of the SCOTUS Blog, like a really significant addition to our roster. So for those reasons, we didn't have SCOTUS Blog on our strategic roadmap at the end of 2024. We ended up acquiring the company. The deal was signed by the end of April. And so the focus shifted a little bit to really invest more resources into this nascent B2B vertical.
All right, so finished 2025, 7.5 million in revenue, which is 50% growth year over year is not something to sneeze at. How would you break that down across the different revenue streams of subscriptions, sponsorship, and if there was another one,
licensing. So those are really the three legs to the stool right now. I would say it's about 80% membership, 15% commercial partnerships, and then 5% licensing.
And what is the licensing component?
Large tech companies that are interested in, they're already scraping our content for their LLMs. And so, as we think about how media companies should what their posture should be towards large tech companies. In an age of AI, we had an opportunity to do a couple deals. And we were using Tollbit to determine like who is scraping our content most aggressively. And we're certainly not in a position like the New York Times to, press a lawsuit against these companies. I don't want to reveal my cards, but it's obvious that we're not going up against tech behemoths as a dispatch. We have other priorities. There's another model where we can operate as a collective with other publishers. There's been probably middling success there. But on the licensing side, I think what we represent to some of these large tech companies who have deals with large news organizations, these companies probably recognize that those large news organizations have more of like a left-leaning valence. And so in order to create a sense of parity or balance with internal shareholders, like we're a really great solution for them.
Which tech companies have you done licensing deals with?
Can't say.
All right, asked a different way. Let's assume it's the ones that we know. How did those deals come to the table? Did you approach them? Did they approach you?
Combination.
And what is sort of the structure of those deals? Are they multi-year deals, like one-offs? Like, I'm just curious.
Multi-year deals. It's probably as much as I can reveal right now. I want to be generous, but I also need to understand the four walls of the agreement.
Yeah. All right. So 15% then is sponsorships. Talk a little bit about what that part of the business looks like.
So right now we have programmatic advertising that runs through SPAN, the Spotify ad network, on our podcasts. We have direct sold programs into our podcasts. We have direct sold programs onto the SCOTUS Blog site. We have sponsorship that's going to be that is showing up in our newsletters, that will show up in our newsletters with more regularity in the next couple months. We have event sponsorships. So we did our SCOTUS Blog Summit last year. We had 7 major law firms. We had the Pacific Legal Foundation. They were also one of the sponsors of our Dispatch Energy vertical. We have sponsors that are unlocking content for readers. So content that we would otherwise put behind the paywall. A sponsor feels like the messaging of what would otherwise go behind the paywall is congruent with their own objectives. And so we typically, unlock on their behalf.
And so is that like a day rate, like a weekly rate? Like how does...
It's typically, these are typically, I'd say 3-month campaigns. So these are a bit more white glove, with the exception of like the programmatic deals. But I think we're going to start focus with these newsletter sponsorships. That's more of like a straight media buy, so 2 to 12-week campaigns.
And then on the unlocking of content, would it be like I sponsor the entire dispatch and therefore the entire site is unlocked, or is it vertical based? Like
typically vertical based.
And then they're buying like day, week, month kind of unlocks, or?
Correct. And then it's vertical based, and then it's also personality based, which is effectively topic based. Given we have our experts in our roster of effectively writing about a prescribed set of topics.
Being a site that is still known heavily for being politically oriented, do you run into any challenges from a brand safety perspective where sponsors and advertisers are just unwilling to talk to you because you are A, political, B, right of center?
So no, the short answer is no. I know like typically like news, it's often said in the advertising world is like a 4-letter word. I think the way that we approach news, it's not a 4-letter word in that sense, in the sense that like, everything that we do is very fair-minded. It has a reputation for being, deeply balanced or well-researched. And so from that perspective, there are certain brands that know that if we are going to reach key opinion leaders, we need to be in news. And in many ways, we provide kind of a brand safe environment for those advertisers. And also, I think at this point we have faith-based coverage, which is really looks at faith through a multitude of lenses, but really at the intersection of culture and faith. We have a lot of like family and culture coverage, economic news. Scott Lincecum, who writes for us, has been the tariff expert for the last 20 years, and so this has really been a big moment for him over the last, call it year plus. And our energy vertical does really well because that's focused on energy innovation. That's also incredibly not just brand safe, but deeply contextually relevant to folks in the energy category.
The inverse of brand safety would be putting, as a site that has a reputation of being a bit more critical of the president, and the president being completely willing to throw anybody under the bus from, if he doesn't like what they're saying. Have you run into advertisers who are worried about spending with you because you might be more critical of the president?
It's a great question. And I'd say the short answer is yes, without getting into any more details. But I think part of what we offer is it's typically your personalities that are a bit more critical. But we do have kind of a balanced analysis. We have a program called the Dispatch Debate Series, which takes a charged topic, let's say like the war in Iran, and looks at it, kind of the most fair-minded arguments on both sides of that coin. And so even if there are advertisers that have a concern of, one, being adjacent news, two, that the news is going to have a slant against the administration that would elicit their ire, we have these products that are incredibly fair-minded, that are as brand safe as you could probably get.
All right, so you've talked for a few times about this expansion to new verticals, right? Faith, family. How are you identifying those verticals, and what makes those verticals the right verticals for the Dispatch?
So a couple ways. I think the top-down way is, let's look at the values that underpin the idea of what it means to be conservative. And from that, we looked at free markets, we looked at family, we looked at faith. Again, all very broadly defined. We think that that's more defensible than focusing on topics that are purely within the realm of politics. Obviously, all of those topic areas can have some kind of political valence, but we tend to look at these areas more through the lens of policy. So they tend to be, these are 3,000-4,000 word articles or newsletters, so they tend to be much more in the weeds. The audience is probably a bit more, prosumer in nature. And then we also look just at we do reader surveys every 6 months, and so we have a better understanding of the topics for which we have sufficient coverage and those that require a bit more investment.
All right, so you bought SCOTUS Blog. Was it last year?
Last year.
Which is, you could make an argument, kind of a deviation away from the consumer business that you were really going after. Why buy SCOTUS Blog? Was it purely opportunistic?
It was opportunistic within that strategic framework that we laid out. Like, we had these 3 key objectives, and then once we realized that SCOTUS Blog was for sale, or could be for sale, we realized, this actually satisfies those 3 objectives pretty neatly. So, and then within that, in order to make an off-budget investment to the board, we needed to put together a strategic rationale that articulated a business plan for an operation that basically ran as a 501c3 for its entire existence. And so that business plan involved sponsorship revenue. It also involved a pro product that we had more of a theory of the case about, and we've since been able to prove out through some initial testing, a lot of kind of canvassing of the market, and that's a product that we're going to be introducing later this year.
So you're going to roll out a premium subscription level product, is that
correct? And the promise to SCOTUS Blog readers is that the core SCOTUS Blog product that you've enjoyed for the past 20 years is not going to change. In fact, it's only going to get more feature rich. And so we've made significant headcount investments, significant tech and product investments. But then on top of that, we're building out another product that we can talk about probably in another 2 months or so. That's more for a professional audience.
So what did you have to pay to get SCOTUS Blog?
Wouldn't your listeners like to know?
They sure would.
No, I mean, it was it was not. I mean, I think we feel like we got fair value for the deal. I can say that.
All right, so SCOTUS Blog is a B2B play, right? Especially with this pro product you're building, and from a sponsorship perspective, you're targeting. I mean, you're not reading SCOTUS Blog unless you're probably pretty deep into what the Supreme Court is
Not
thinking
necessarily. I mean, with birthright citizenship case today, Trump is going to be attending. I expect that we'll have several 100,000 concurrents on that one article. So we have seen that SCOTUS Blog, and that was a part of the theory of the case, is that it has a very specific verticalized audience, but it's a content area that in this era where the Supreme Court really has to protect against an overreaching executive branch, Congress has effectively abdicated its responsibilities. And there's going to be a lot of general interest news that's coming out of SCOTUS Blog. One of the assets that they had is a TikTok account that has 500,000 followers, which is much more upper funnel. Katie, who runs it, is able to kind of articulate what's going on at the Supreme Court for more of a general consumer audience.
As you think about that, though, where from a sponsorship perspective, what's the sell for the sponsor if you're talking such a large audience, but then SCOTUS Blog has the perception of being pretty focused towards a certain legal audience? Like, how are you thinking about sponsorship for that?
We're primarily selling the professional audience.
Okay. How does that sponsorship and monetization differ from the dispatch? Is it different teams? Is it all the same team? Like, what's the story there?
So I'd say this is one of the core organizational challenges that we have. And I think that a lot of media organizations have when they, quote, turn on advertising revenue. I anticipate we will always be incredibly focused on membership revenue, both because it foregrounds our consumer as the customer, but also at a strategic level, it optimizes for enterprise value. Your listenership doesn't have to be educated on that. If you look at public market multiples of ad-based businesses like a BuzzFeed versus those that are primarily subscription-based. So that market reality imposes a certain discipline on the organization. While it's exciting and seductive that there are advertisers that want to commit seven-figure investments into the dispatch, we recognize that in many ways it could be a poison pill, because all of a sudden the executive team is focused on servicing that revenue. Your product roadmap adjusts to focus on the needs of an advertiser that might be at odds with the needs of your consumer. And so that has been a tough balance. One of the ways in which we've balanced that is focusing a lot of our demand generation on contract resources and building a very lean and kind of nimble team internally that can service that revenue, that can do a targeted outbound on select accounts, while keeping the organization's focus on building this growth marketing engine for memberships.
And the way that I've always, and I haven't quite achieved this with AMO yet, but the way I've sort of looked at the split between, I look at it more as reader revenue and sponsorships, because we have a big event where we charge a lot of money for tickets, is I try to cover most of our cost with the reader revenue, and then whatever sponsorship money comes in is margin, or it doesn't cover when it comes to the event, that helps cover the event. But I try to cover most of my fixed costs vis-a-vis like salaries and all that with reader revenue, because it is a bit more of a stable revenue. Is that how you guys kind of operate as well?
Definitely. I mean, we have retention rates of over 90%, and so that's reliable. That's why reader revenue commands more of a market multiple than advertiser revenue. I remember talking to the founder of Tough Mudder, one of those races that were popular like 12 years ago, and they also had a very similar model. Like they would sell out tickets for an event over 90 days before the event, and then all the sponsorship revenue would just be pure margin. Plus, they would also get special tax incentives from these kind of woebegone towns in which they would host these races, in like Western Pennsylvania, because it would just be bringing so much economic activity.
One of the ways your members can give you money is with donations.
Yep.
How do people actually participate that way?
They do, and it's a very suboptimized part of our business, I would say. One of the ways in which I'd say, productized that so far is through this student program. So we recognize that one of our kind of major cohorts are these students, call it like 18 to 28, who love the dispatch, rely on the dispatch, but perhaps low willingness to pay. And then we have another cohort, call it like one of our key personas for the dispatch is like this principled conservative, someone who maybe has been following Steve and Jonah from their Weekly Standard National Review days. They're concerned about the state of the world. They're already an annual or a premium dispatch member at $300 a year. They want to do more. We can probably do a better job with donations, perhaps earmarked donations, but the productized version of that is through these student sponsorships. We're likely going to be doing more regular drives for that because we have now more student demand than we have a supply of, call it, donated student sponsorships. But we look at that as another big engine for the business.
When you look at those two price points for subscriptions, the 150 and the 300,
100 and 300,
100 and
right now,
300.
yeah.
What are they getting at 300 that makes them want to pay that? And what percent of the total subs is probably in that range?
Right now, it's probably mid to high single-digit percentages. So at 300, you get 2 free annual memberships to gift. So already, that's like very clear, demonstrable value. You have unlimited gift memberships. There's now merchandise that we're like, totes and sweatshirts and T-shirts that we're introducing in about a month. That's also part of the premium bundle. We've also been we've assiduously avoided raising prices on annual, despite the fact that inflation and just the overall like kind of consumer price index has gone up like 20-some% over the last 6 years. All the while, our editorial roster has gone from 4 people to probably 30 people. Plus, we've introduced a regular contributor roster of about 75 people. So we've really given kind of maximum value at the $100 mark without raising prices. In many ways, it's unfortunate that 100 is just like a nice round number. We probably should be charging 150, and maybe we will, test some price increases. But the way that we've allowed readers to kind of increase their kind of average revenue per user is through this premium tier. We have a lifetime tier at $1,500, which at this point, since we've been around for 6 years and at $1,500, like kind of pays for itself after a certain time. But there's going to be a lot more testing with pricing and packaging in the next couple months.
How many lifetime members do you have?
Low 4 figures.
Wow. My apprehension about lifetime, because I've thought about lifetime for AMO, is once you've collected that dollar, you can never really actually apply it to your enterprise value.
That's right.
Because your buyer doesn't actually get to benefit from that. How do you...
Does that amortize that over 5 years?
Okay.
As more of just like a gap practice. Agree. 1,500 was like a kind of just randomly selected 6 years ago. So I think lifetime is probably more in the realm of $5,000. Like that's probably where we would see more fair value exchange at this point.
Well, I think we all make up our pricing when we're first starting out.
That's right.
I was going to be $100 a year, and then the day before I launched, I'd simply hit a 2 rather than a 1 and launched at $200. Like I was like, wait a second, I'm more B2B. I'll just be $200. Like there was no science or math into it. And then I doubled the price a year ago because I had never increased the price, but I had rolled out. We had hired reporters and editors, and we had a Slack community, and we had all these extra features, but we hadn't increased the price. I said, screw it, let's double it.
Yep.
Revenue's up. We had churn, but not an insurmountable amount of churn. So, yeah, we all make up our prices.
That's right. I mean, there are a number of firms that purport to have like real pricing science, and we've talked to them a couple times, and at some point we'll pull the trigger. But for right now, there are other levers that we can play with that don't require additional outside consulting.
Yeah. Before you mentioned that you're thinking about a pro product, I know you're not going to want to talk too much about it, but what are you thinking about with regard to a pro product for SCOTUS Blog?
I think to reveal that, I would have to share more details about the product. I think it's fair to say that we reach 100% of like AmLaw 100 firms. We reach everyone from managing directors to or managing partners to associates. We know that we have probably most Supreme Court justices reading our work on a regular basis or listening to our work, and so there are certain products within the legal space that where we can be uniquely competitive. And it's relatively low TAM versus a consumer membership product, but we think that the average contract value can be, we'd ultimately sell it at like a firm-wide product as opposed to selling individual products, and we'd start there. And we think ultimately these B2B pro products are going to be the thing that really adds significant margin to the business in the years ahead. So we expect that we'll have the first legal product later this year, and we expect to have at least one other pro product in market by next year.
Pro product outside of law or still
outside of
law?
law?
Oh,
law plus one other pro product.
I mean, ALM sold last year for, the reported number wasn't out, but I heard rumors it was pretty high price for the merger, and that's their entire business is high price subscriptions targeting those AmLaw 100 and all of that. So certainly an interesting market to move into. Do you find culturally within the business that there's difficulty in thinking both consumer and B2B? Because a lot of media companies have struggled to do both at the same time.
Yeah. Well, we have separate newsrooms, so that helps. Although there's a lot of cross-pollination between those newsrooms, in part because a lot of legal news, like what's going on at the Supreme Court, is relevant to the Dispatch newsroom. And ultimately, what we're trying to build on the business side is a growth engine that could support both businesses, a revenue engine that could support both businesses, and that's really the work to be done this year.
All right, so that was your first big M&A deal, was buying SCOTUS Blog. As you continue to think about expansion for the Dispatch, is there more M&A that you're doing, or because it was opportunistic, one-off?
It's an active motion. But I look at M&A a bit more expansively at this point. I think if you're a media company, M&A in the creator economy is having some kind of platform deal with a creator. It's not necessarily owning all of their IP. So, Joanna Stern, who left the Wall Street Journal, has a Substack, did a deal with NBC. I think there are versions of that we're also pursuing, where if someone has a really great audience in a newsletter, perhaps there's another newsletter product we can develop with them. Perhaps there's a podcast product we can develop with them. Or if there's someone who puts together like a really incredible event series and they want to convert that CRM into some kind of media product, we would want to be a partner for that. And we're looking at creators, public intellectuals across national security, healthcare, education, and in the markets also broadly defined.
So this is your idea behind the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Correct.
What makes a good creator for that universe?
I would say there are 4 C's that govern what the fifth C is a creator, but the 4 C's are: they have to have compelling content. Those are 2 C's, but call it 1 C, content. That's table stakes. The second is they have to have charisma, meaning they have to be able to stand and deliver in front of an audience, on camera, on a podcast, on stage. The third C is they have to have convening power. So can they just send a couple texts and recruit an incredible group of people around which you can build an event? And the fourth C is conversion power. Can you get those, their fans, their audience, to convert to broader Dispatch subscribers or Dispatch B2B pro subs?
And how do you think about one of those products fitting within the Dispatch? Because theoretically, if I'm a creator and I come to you we work together on a product, that's going to be made available to the Dispatch subscriber base. But I'm an independent creator. So how do you think about compensation? How do you think about valuing that creator's contribution to the total Dispatch subscription? You're not increasing pricing. So, each incremental creator decreases technically the amount that you take. So talk a little bit about that.
I think there are a number of ways to look at this. I think fundamentally, it's best if you're able to test, if they can start as a contributor and you can run tests to see how well their audience converts, how well their discrete piece of content performs for the Dispatch audience. If there are commercial opportunities that develop, we have certain existing partners and new partners that want to come on to sponsor. Maybe they're less interested in sponsoring the creator individually, but as part of a broader platform play with the dispatch. Ultimately, those are the ways that you can develop more of a business case. If like, is there audience? Is there revenue? Is there some kind of brand accrual? And ideally, you're checking all three boxes.
What are the challenges you've run into as you've kind of build out this universe of ever expanding dispatch contributors and creators?
I think the first challenge is really just articulating what are we looking for, what's the criteria, and getting alignment internally and at the board level. And so this is really a lot of the work that happened over the last, I'd say, 6 months. And now you translate strategic alignment into day-to-day tactics, everything from let's set up a Slack channel where we aggregate all of these disparate conversations that key stakeholders in the at the company are having. Let's gather intel, like effectively standing up a corp dev function. Or like, let's go out in the market, let's develop a better sense of who's available, what fair economic exchange might look like, to answer your question. Again, it just does vary pretty significantly. But I think increasingly, your most successful creators are going to be multi-hyphenates with like 4 or 5 sources of revenue. And we can be at least one of those sources of revenue.
This is a particularly important topic because the Dispatch was founded by 2 very well-known writers, creators who came with their own audiences from their whole careers covering this. As the guy brought in to sort of run this business, what is it like, quote unquote, taking over for the founders where you're day to day running the Dispatch, whereas they started it 6 years ago? What does that transition look like?
I'd say I'm truly there to honor a vision and a mission that they developed 6 years ago that's still as relevant today as it was then, even more so. So in many ways, I'm a steward for their vision. And again, like I'm a media operator. The name, the name of this product. I am, much more of a I'm focused on the plumbing. I'm focused on the infrastructure to allow the creators that we have, including the founders, to realize their best work.
So let them focus on creating, let you focus on making sure the business continues to grow.
Correct. And I'm just as motivated by building this business and just as enthusiastic about the plumbing of a media business as they are about the kind of ideological battles that are now happening within the conservative movement writ large. Not to say that doesn't interest me; it does, which is why I'm here. But I also think that I'm just I'm an attention merchant in the way that I was even with Fatherly, where I ran Fatherly for 9 years as a single non-dad. So that kind of, I'd say, conveys my bona fides as someone who's an operator, who really just appreciates how ideas are encoded in content and distributed via digital channels. That's endlessly fascinating to me, especially now with how quickly the tools of the trade are evolving. And so on one level, just kind of mechanically, super interesting and motivating to me, but also I deeply, deeply align with the sense of mission that the founders have and truly that everybody at the company has, which is for the type of content that we're producing, I wouldn't say slowing the news down, but helping to kind of sense make at scale is just deeply important today when, like it or not, most people are in the middle of kind of a hot information war. And ultimately, our view of the world is downstream from the information that we consume.
So I am a founder. You were the founder of Fatherly. Founders have a reputation for being slightly harder to work with because we have strong conviction, strong passion. It's our business. It's our baby, whatever you want to call it. The Dispatch brought in an outside operator. I know you were an advisor from the start, but an outside operator to come in and kind of run the business. Maybe one day AMO brings on an outside operator to run the business. It's not in the near term. If my team is listening, you don't get your hopes up. How do you prepare? What advice would you give an outside operator coming into a creator founder led media business so that they could be most successful?
It's a great question. I would say relationships and trust matter first and foremost. I mean, even with anyone that I hire, there's this 60-day window where trust is earned and established and then maintained. And ultimately, once you have my trust, there's a very broad kind of permission structure in which someone can operate. I think it's got to be the same. You could certainly have Steve and Jonah on the podcast and have them share their view, but we had a long history, maybe 4.5 years together, where I think there was trust of like Mike's due to say ratio is always going to be greater than 1. He cares deeply in a way that a founder really does. In many ways, has just a bias towards, especially early in a company's development. You have when no one really believes in you, and you're fighting against the wind, and you have someone who comes in who's has deep conviction that mirrors your own conviction about the space that you're tackling. It's easy to, I'd say, over-index on their enthusiasm versus really assessing skills and experience. But fortunately, in this instance, had the skills and experience and had the same level of enthusiasm for what they were building. And I'd attended board meetings. I'd helped prepare board decks. And so there was a familiarity with the kind of dramatist personae at the Dispatch, an established relationship. So I would say conveying mission alignment early and often, establishing trust. And I think trust is typically built by that due to say ratio. It's built by reputation. So they can feel free to talk to anybody that I've ever worked with. I always feel like when someone provides me references, I try to call everybody else but those references. And I'd say that's the key. And then just again, your every day, you need to kind of approach it with the same level of vim and vigor as if it's day 0.
So really, it was like a 4-year interview process.
Pretty much.
Where
Didn't realize it at the time.
Yeah. So what were you doing before you joined the Dispatch?
Immediately before, I was developing, I was serving in fractional CEO roles. Worked with American Express and Giant Spoon on their Departures product, which was really interesting. That was probably last consumer lifestyle that was not subscription focused. I mean, we had an incredible CRM that we were operating from with American Express, Centurion, and Platinum card members, but it wasn't a paid subscription product in the traditional sense. I was working for a pet supplement brand. I was in many ways looking beyond media, and all the while with all of this, incredible change going on in the media space, had a lot of opinions. And after a while, you kind of tire of just sharing those opinions with your wife and your friends, and you want to actually put those opinions to practice.
You mean the wife and friends grow tired of the opinions?
That's probably right.
Yeah, okay.
They're why don't you do something about it? I remember early COVID, my wife was you're marching around the apartment like a general who's looking for his next war. And in many ways, I think signing up with the Dispatch represents the next, the next tour of duty.
I want to talk a little about the team in a second, but we live in this era of AI where a lot of media companies are terrified about what AI is going to do to their business, and their response to that is they're all leaning into events, or many of them are leaning into events as sort of this anti-AI thesis. AI cannot disintermediate the face-to-face, the event. So how is the Dispatch looking at events as a business model, as an engagement model? What's the strategy for you guys there?
It's all the above. So we have, at this point, maybe 4 different categories of events. So we have large-scale events with national stakeholders. I mentioned the SCOTUS Summit. We're going to have 2 of those, which are effectively term previews. Those are, we have sponsors, those are ticketed, and those are typically profitable. They were profitable. The SCOTUS Blog Summit was profitable in its first instantiation, so we expect it's going to be very profitable this year. We also have regional events. So we did an event in Grand Rapids. These are typically 150, 200 people, often serve as like live podcasts. Those are ticketed, also have regional sponsors. Likely those will be part of like broader, like a broader tour or event series as opposed to just a series of one-offs. We have virtual events. So we have like founder town halls, which is more of a perk for premium and lifetime members. And then probably the most exciting new event development that we have are these dispatch juntos, Juntos, that we've introduced a couple months ago that are now really building a lot of momentum. And these are events that we're not producing, but in fact our members are producing on their own time via their own volition through their own networks. And Junto, interestingly, was actually the original name for the dispatch, inspired by these Ben Franklin kind of gatherings in public houses where people can practice civic virtue by talking about news of the day. And we think that this is a tremendous opportunity for our readers, for our members specifically, to gather, build community, to almost leverage the dispatch as a discussion guide and personalize that based on their specific geography. These are deliberately like 20, 25 person events. They meet either every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks. We have a full-time or a community manager who's spending kind of all of his time focusing on standing these up. We expect to have 30 that are regularly occurring by the end of June. We have 2 that are spinning. We have 1 that's going live in Grand Rapids, Austin in the next 2 weeks. And we think this is one that's tremendously differentiated because these are cities that like we're not producing the event. We're effectively producing a series of best practices. We have about 2,000 hand raisers of people who volunteered via no compensation to produce these events on their own. And we also think that this is a tremendous user acquisition opportunity. It's a tremendous retention opportunity. It deepens members' relationship to the dispatch. It deepens members' relationships to each other. It's a natural surface area for a referral program. And it's also more surface area for the right kinds of sponsors. And these are also in cities that are, distinctly not New York, DC, LA. We have a Junto coming in New York in the next 2 weeks. But I think the point is that we think that there could be 2,000 Juntos in the next year that meet on a regular basis in cities across the country. And that feels very dispatchian at its core.
Do you have to be a dispatch member to go to a Junto?
No, but there'll be incentives if you're not a member to become a member. And because the dispatch is curating discussion guides, it's reasonable that person would want to follow along more closely as a member.
So the idea being you'll kind of promote these to the dispatch members as like a pseudo perk to being a dispatch member, but a dispatch member could bring a non-dispatch member.
Correct.
That hopefully gets you new subscribers.
Correct.
Makes sense. And then monetization of that, you said sponsorship. How do you think about, if you have 2,000 Juntos, how do you think about sponsorship for that? Is that a play or?
We are still figuring that out, but ultimately in the same way that you have national brands that have regional marketing teams, there could be consumer brands that have regional marketing teams that want to activate in select metros. Whatever sponsorship model we end up choosing, we need to make sure that the sponsor is actually providing something of demonstrable value to the Junto, so it doesn't feel like like a hat on a hat or some kind of imposition.
So you were brought in to kind of work on the plumbing of the business. How has the team evolved from a structural perspective since you joined? I guess it's almost 2 years ago now, right?
Yep. We had like a part-time ops person when I joined. And we also had about 20 people on the editorial side reporting into one person. So there's a lot of, when I talk about plumbing, there's a lot of like organizational work that is often unheralded, but is deeply important. It's how the business can function. It's how you retain top talent. It allows you to recruit new talent into the organization. We had a tech team that was, I think, like 14 time zones away. We had to get a new tech team. We had to rebuild our technical and kind of marketing infrastructure. That takes time. The brand had never done any kind of, we had a logo that was made by someone in South America for $20. That's all well and good up until a point, but ultimately, like the design, the kind of user interfaces need a bit of a facelift. Again, all of these as like individual kind of internal motions aren't the kinds of things that are externally very interesting, but in aggregate they are, because in aggregate the consumer experience has changed demonstrably. In aggregate, the dispatch on the outside in and in the inside out is a better place to work. People are better set up for success. There's better pathing for the talent that you have where they can really grow. There's more of a learning and development function. And then we also brought in a business infrastructure. And I think the needs on the business side are different now than they would have been, let's say, 3 years ago, because of the advent of with cloud code and everything that entails, where a single growth marketer can stand up 10 different landing pages on his or her own in 15 minutes. You don't necessarily need like a separate outside design agency to do that for you. Once you have a brand book, you can use Google's Pomeli to develop 20 different creative assets that you can use on Meta. So it's also been interesting to figure out like how much investment do we actually need? Can we pause and can we actually focus a bit more time on upskilling the team that we have with the tools that are available? But we brought on a chief of staff who's now the GM of our B2B business. We brought on a kind of another ops manager who's better fit for this next phase of the business. We brought on a full-time salesperson, a sales support person. We brought on a different fractional marketing team. We brought on a new product and dev organization that's also deeply embedded. It was a decision of like, hey, do we hire tech and engineering resources full-time, or do we find a team that could ultimately embed? I think another kind of aspect of the labor market that's made this moment in time particularly interesting is just the quality of fractional talent that's available, the tools of the trade that effectively allow that fractional talent to embed, especially in a hybrid workforce, where everybody is available in Slack or in the right channels in Slack, and they don't need to be physically present in the same office all the time. So I'd say evolving the organization as kind of the rules of engagement have evolved has been deeply interesting and rewarding work. And even coming out of Q1, where we rebuilt our internal dashboards, we've put together daily goals of subscriptions and registrations and conversion through various channels that allows us to have a much closer handle on the overall health of the business than we did a year ago.
Yeah. One of the things that I am increasingly feeling strong conviction about is that middle, if you think about a media business like a Barbell, and I don't mean it from like niche versus mass scale, which is the classic example.
Right.
I mean from organizational design. We're going to see the center of a media company, the non-content people and the non-sales people, get very narrow, where you've got, like you said, one
Right.
growth marketer who can do 10 landing pages in 15
Right.
minutes. I don't need 5 anymore, right? I don't need 10. Like marketing teams, audience development teams are going to shrink, which isn't an inherently bad thing, because it just means you'll have more resources for either more content or more revenue generating activities.
Right.
That I think, if I have gained anything from learning about this whole, rise of AI and what does this mean and all that I think is the biggest opportunity for publishers.
That's right.
That is why they're not going to die, because everyone's going to need content. Even if we see a drop in traffic, 30, 40, 50%, the audiences that remain will still need this high quality content. The businesses might be smaller, but they'll still be highly sustainable because that middle can be so narrow.
I think that's right. And I think these parasocial relationships are in many ways stickier than relationships that you'd have with institutional brands previously. Like I didn't, for as much as I watched the Today Show, I didn't have, particular ardor for NBC or for the Today Show writ large. You're tuning in for Katie Couric or whoever it is. And the same thing now, like people are tuning in for our personalities, but they're staying because of the breadth of coverage that we have and just the overall trust across the institution.
3 years from now, where do you want to see the Dispatch?
In many ways, it looks a lot like what we have now, but at scale. So I think we're going to have, there'll be more acquisitions, there'll be more verticals on the B2B side. Expect that we'll have more of a dedicated national security vertical in the way that we have a dedicated law vertical through newsletters, podcasts, probably some events. Ditto for events. Like I said, healthcare. I think we'll have even more coverage areas on the consumer side. We'll have more personalities as part of that overall Marvel Cinematic Universe on the consumer side of the roster. I think these Juntos will be like a very compelling gateway into the Dispatch. Another reason why people stay with the Dispatch. And in many ways, like we want the Dispatch to be a household name. That is, in the parlance of marketing, it's also a bit of an upper funnel problem. Those who know about the Dispatch, those who read the Dispatch, even if they're not a paid member, are deeply, deeply committed. I've never seen like the volume and the the intensity of appreciation in our testimonials that I see for the Dispatch than I've seen for any other media company. And I don't mean that with like any hyperbole. We have this mega doc of thousands of testimonials that are written by, it looks like a cross section of America that all point to one thing. Like, you're a source of sanity in a time of like real unrest and a moment when the trust in media is at its lowest. I think part of the way in which we inspire trust is admitting our priors. Back to the prior conversation of like, are we independent? Are we right of center? I think it suffices that by admitting the kind of, the conservative bona fides of our founders and some of the original contributors, it contributes to a sense of trust, even for those who don't necessarily ascribe to those views. But I think the Dispatch is going to be much more of a household name. You're certainly going to see a lot more in terms of video. Right now, we've put very little emphasis on video. Now all podcasts are TV shows. That's why there's kind of a multicam setup here.
Mm-hmm.
And we've, for the longest time, it sufficed that we've just had like really, really good audio programs. And that no longer suffices, for the type of audience that we're trying to capture.
$7.5 million in revenue in 2025. 3 years from now, do you want to put a bogey on the record as to where you want to be?
Yeah, I think we should be at least 25 million 3 years. I think that's pretty, based on how we can grow on the consumer side, based on, I think, the available market capture that we have there, based on the kind of growing ARPU opportunity that we have also on the consumer side, based on the additional surface area that we'll have for sponsors between events and net new products, and also the growth of our B2B businesses. I think 25 looks like growth in consumer and 3 scaling B2B verticals.
Would it still be 80% membership, 15 sponsor, 5 licensing, or do you think that changes as you get to 25?
Changes a little bit, but I think as long as we're over like 60, 65% subscription, we're in a safe territory.
At some point, you've mentioned enterprise value a couple times. I mentioned it once. Only someone who is thinking about an exit at some point thinks about enterprise value, I think. Most creators are not thinking about enterprise value. It's not in their DNA to think about enterprise value. Do you have a mandate to get the Dispatch to a certain size to sell at some point?
So I think I speak in terms of enterprise value because at the end of the day, we do have a board of directors. We do have shareholders. We've raised a little over $6 million. I've been public about that, but that was 6 years ago. So there is a fiduciary responsibility that I have. I also think it's a helpful forcing function to think about just like what is ultimately, it's an answer like what is good for the business. It's more self-evident what's often good for the consumer. And so I think that's just a helpful framing. We don't have venture capital dollars, so there isn't the kind of structural pressure to deliver a return in a certain period of time. or to deliver, to do a fundraise. So there's a mark to market for the VCs that are on our cap table. Fortunately, we do not have those pressures. So I wouldn't say that there is the kind of mandate that you have when you're running a venture-backed media company.
Who could be a theoretical buyer of the Dispatch? It doesn't have to be an individual brand name, but as you think about the universe of possible buyers out there, what does that look like to you?
Well, I think mission alignment matters a lot in many ways that could limit the universe. You want someone who the Dispatch was founded to live beyond the life of the founders of the founding team.
Hence the name.
Yeah, right. So ultimately, if there is an exit, when there is an exit, you want a partner that is deeply mission aligned, that wants to grow the Dispatch on its own terms, in terms that kind of align with the promise that we've made with our members.
Does the free press deal give you a multiple that you're marching towards?
Sure, happy to take that multiple. Obviously, a lot of exogenous factors that go into that, but yeah, we'll take it.
So Fatherly was, you could argue, very squarely a Web 2.0 sort of product. We are now in this sort of creator-led media business. If I asked you to launch Fatherly again today, how would you do it this time?
So I think about that from the other dimension of just being an actual human dad. And there are some days when I look at Fatherly and just the market of parenting advice as being all for naught. And there are other days when I wake up in the morning feeling like, oh, this is spot on. I don't have a deep. I've talked to a number of people that are trying to build Fatherly, trying to build like specific parenting or like expert-led like LLMs like built for parents, or there's like a roster of parenting experts or pediatric experts. I now see how my wife uses Claude the way that parents not even a generation ago would look at like Dr. Google for answers in the dark of night. If it was to be a media product, I would certainly have a preference for subscription. I think you have to have personalities or a collection of personalities. In many ways, I think what we were building at Fatherly was a canonical source of deeply credible parenting information that like outlives my involvement in the company. We published 35,000 articles, and they were all researched. They were written by professional journalists, and so how that content gets surfaced to a consumer, maybe that's changed a little bit, but the Fatherly content is still surfacing on the internet. The short answer is don't know. I'd invariably take like the frame of subscription, creator, probably some relationship, adversarial or not, with LLMs.
I want to end with the same two questions I ask every guest who comes on the show. First, what is the single piece of advice you would give operators looking to grow in this sort of newer era of media that we're in?
I think you have to be a perpetual student. I think you have to get out and talk to your peers on a regular basis, because that's likely the best way that you could learn, although everyone has their own kind of pedagogical bent. But also it's learning from your peers. It's having more of a bias towards curiosity and just general openness. And I think first principles matter when it comes to the type of content that you're producing, the integrity by which you're producing content. I do think quality invariably wins out at the end, but it needs the right business model.
And second, what is something in your life, it could be personal, it could be professional, that you are absolutely obsessed with right now?
I mean, the cheesy answer is my son, and the reason he's at this point 22 months old. Just like the degree of change on a daily basis is fascinating. And you think I'd be bored of this already because of the 35,000 articles and just like that intense focus on prenatal to 3 years old. But then just to experience it directly is truly a fascinating and like just deeply human and deeply humbling experience. Humbling also because I don't wake up later than 5 o'clock on any day of the week, including Saturdays and Sundays. So I'm also amazed at how I've physically adjusted to just like a lack of sleep, and it also reminds me that the things that I thought were like really tropey about like the fatherly young dad, like the underslept, kind of cranky dad relying on coffee, like these tropes are true, at least in my instance.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Done.